The Beatles popped up on the radar when I was working in London in Fleet Street. Like most young Australian journalists at the time, the big deal was to hop on a ship, go to London and try your luck. And that luck was pretty good. I was working for the Mirror, which is a tabloid, and then for Reuters. But they paid so poorly and I was so impoverished, the only way to supplement the income that was available in Fleet Street was to moonlight and freelance with stories and radio interviews back to Australia. And I was lucky enough to be introduced to EMI's then product manager, and he in turn, for whatever reason, kept introducing me to these new acts. And the new acts included the Beatles, Gerry and the Pacemakers, and the Rolling Stones. So I interviewed all of those and sent several different interviews to Doug Entwistle at 3DB, the late Doug Entwistle at 3DB. And I got a very sharp response after I'd sent 2 or 3 different lots of interviews to 3DB saying, please, please don't send me any more interviews with unknown artists. Well, they were unknown pretty well at that stage, just the Beatles, just the Rolling Stones, and just Gerry and the Pacemakers. But I'm glad my judgment was a bit better than his. Ken Brodziak lived in Melbourne, and he did hear interviews that I was sending in from London, and that's how Ken Brodziak knew about the Beatles. Nobody else did. Certainly the Beatles didn't know they were coming to Australia. When it was announced, I immediately contacted Ken Brodziak and Aztec Promotions, I think it was called, and told him that I was back in Australia and that wanted to be involved in it and in the tour. And I was in Sydney and Melbourne. When the Beatles did make it to Australia, Ken Brodziak arranged for me to get into press conferences. They asked for me to be found and brought to the hotel, which I found quite fascinating, quite humbling actually, when you had all the big heavyweight DJs, Bob Rogers and others, running night and day about the Beatles. They remembered our times in London, and I went up to their hotel on a number of occasions, and they were just the same as they were in the London fun that we had together. In Melbourne, Ken Brodziak arranged for me to fly down with them to Melbourne, and the Southern Cross Hotel was the absolute pinnacle. If you went to the Southern Cross Hotel or you stayed there, you really made it. Didn't matter to the Beatles. That didn't impress them. What absolutely blew them away, and I was hanging out the window with them, was the crowd that blocked off the entire street below the hotel. Police couldn't do anything. And it was a very interesting lesson in crowd control, or, if you like, no crowd control. But I think also that it encouraged a lot of young Australians to have a crack at show business. There's been some spectacular successes since the Beatles from Australia. It really did have a very beneficial impact. They were clean cut out of the public eye. They may well have had a party or two, but the truth is that they were acceptable. Parents did not mind their kids going to Beatles concerts. Considering that it was a small part of my career, it's fascinating how every now and again someone remembers that I was with the Beatles before they were famous, right from the release of Please Please Me. I was there for the release of Please Please Me, instantly recognised their capability, their writing skills and their showmanship. It was natural. There was nothing, some of the boy bands that have followed are totally manufactured, and it's obvious when you watch them either live or on television. The Beatles were the Beatles. That's who they were. The Beatles were a breakthrough from all the traditional groups that existed, and for that matter, many of the solo artists as well. Cliff Richard had made a name for himself in Australia with the Shadows, and that was absolutely plastic compared to the Beatles, because the Beatles just had no fear at all about being on stage. They were there to entertain themselves as much as the audience. The thing that I suppose we all tend to forget is that they were very, very young, 20, 21, 22, maybe one of them was 23 when all this started to happen. Yet it was obvious that these people were going somewhere. This group of 4 boys would really hit the big time.